Picture this. You want to build an 80s Delta Force kit. And now it's time to really put it all together. You keep searching and searching, and even though you're finding so many of the right pieces, something's just off about it. All right, before I have an aneurysm, let me get all this stuff off of me. That's right, today on the Gear Locker, we're gonna be talking about repro gear. The stuff that gets way too much hate, but also deserves some of it. Much better. And for the record, all of that stuff wasn't really correct for the kit. Well, some of it, but we're going to talk about that later on in the year, so stay tuned for the 80s Delta stuff. But as an impressionist of almost a decade, I found myself on every point of the bell curve. From repro's fine, this is gonna work for me, to repro is the worst thing ever, and then back to repro's okay, and all of the elitism and farbism that comes with every point on that spectrum. So we're gonna answer questions like, why would you even go for a repro? What are some of the reasons that make it acceptable? How to make repros not that bad? And of course, the problems that they bring up in the community. And spoiler alert, it's not really the pieces themselves. But the one reason so many people go for repros is sheer unobtainability of original pieces. Without a doubt, when building an impression kit, there are gonna be some pieces that you just cannot find originals for. Example being, the KSK Speziiell helmets. They are incredibly rare, but building on a repro is probably gonna save you a lot of money and just having the kit in general. You know how recently we talked about not being able to finish a kit? Well, repros kind of are able to fill in that gap, especially for pieces that, again, are impossible to get your hands on. And I would argue this is probably one of the least controversial reasons. For those who are actually using their equipment, building out proper impression kits, or going to reenactments, even if you do have your hands on an original, you're probably not going to want to beat it up. So to fill the gap, reproductions can exist. But the next one is probably one of the more contested pieces, and that's budget. You see, not everything is widely available, and there of course is market scarcity. So when you get original pieces that you can once in a while find on eBay, but are astronomically expensive for what they are, odds are you're going to want to go for a copy of it. And that's where something like these comes in. This is a Crye MRB 1.0, and this is a Shekin Gears Crye MRB 1.0. They're pretty darn close, and if you guys want to see a video going over the differences, I'll definitely do it in the future. But to highlight my point, this belt cost me over $200, which is kind of crazy, but that's not a terrible price on the market nowadays. Whereas this cost me less than $100 shipped. Granted, I got this a while ago, and this was a lot harder to find, but still, market availability does lend you the opportunity for something like this. And let's just say that you want to build out this big fancy kit. In my opinion, it would be more worthwhile for you to go for something that is a quality reproduction and have more money left over to put into other aspects of the kit than spending the bulk of your money on one piece and not having the rest of the kit fleshed out. Of course, building an impression takes a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of research. We talked all about that in another recent video. But when you have a budget constraint, sometimes it's more important to prioritize the whole kit in totality than focusing on one independent piece. And if you want to argue with that, let me know in the comments below. I remember building out my first KSK impression kit. I sold my childhood Pokemon and Lego to be able to afford a reproduction Gen 3, Linderhof Tactic to be specific. And it worked, it fit the bill, and it got me a head start on my kit. But it was a cheap option when I couldn't really afford an original one. But this brings me to point number 3. And that's when you're using a reproduction as a placeholder. Sometimes, if you understand a kit is going to be a long journey, instead of buying all the expensive pieces and taking 2 years to do it, if you want to go run with an impression group or be out with your buddies or take pictures, sometimes a reproduction can help fill the gaps while you're still searching for or saving up for original pieces. And again, high quality reproductions are gonna be kind of what you want to look for. But if saving $100 on one piece and spending that on something else that's going to be able to get you out there is what you need to do to, again, actually get out there, then reproductions are a common choice for people in that situation. Take, for example, airsoft optics. This is a hugely debated topic because so many people are of the idea that an airsoft optic is for airsoft guns, so it'll work. What's the big deal? But other people say real optics only. Why would you spend your money? It's a buy once, cry once kind of thing, right? Well, in some cases, finding original optics, like the original Aimpoint 5000, can be pretty pricey. So get a repro of that, which is available now as of 2026, and then save and wait for a good deal on the original. Or like an EOTech EXPS. Maybe you don't have real gun stuff, or maybe you don't want to build out something that's way expensive, where your optic is more pricey than the base gun itself. So instead, you get that EOTech EXPS from Holy Warrior, and that's going to be your placeholder for now until you eventually upgrade. And that's something that a lot of people find acceptable, but some people who are kind of the hard asses about it don't like to hear. They say no placeholders, again, buy once, cry once. And typically I subscribe to that mentality, but there are so many constraints as we've been talking about. And then there's this other that I think tends to lean towards more the historical side of things versus the modern, but it does still happen in all eras, and this is your aesthetic versus your function. Similar to the idea of optics, sometimes you just need a gear piece that's going to fit the historical reasoning and the historical function. And you're not going to want to buy an original piece to actually use out in the field. For example, a first pattern uniform top for the Vietnam War. This kind of piece is something that I patched up with all of my things for my reenacting unit with Broken Arrow events, and this functions and performs exactly like I would need it to, but it doesn't have the perfect aesthetic of an original. It fits our historical style aesthetic when these were issued new, and it functions as that placeholder again. But would I want to risk spending hundreds of dollars and waste the historical value of an original piece by patching it up with my own modern reproductions to use it out in the field and potentially ruin it? No, absolutely not. Something like this is going to be all I want to use for that. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand, especially those people who are, as I lovingly and hatingly call, basement reenactors. These are the kind of people that think that their way is the only way and that you're gonna buy all original stuff and put it on a shelf and that's it. These hoarders and basement reenactors tend to gatekeep what an impression actually is, when their version of it is, I would argue, far from the reality. You see, when I first started getting into impressions in 2017-ish, repros were all I could afford, and not knowing the markets, all I could find. But as soon as I started understanding where you could get things, I kind of flipped a switch and was like, ditch the repro, real ones are the only way to go. And sometimes I regret that mentality, because thinking just a couple years prior, I was in the position that I was brand new to it. Now, being on the flip side of things, where I'm ushering in new people into impression communities that I'm a part of, I understand the value of a reproduction piece. It's not perfect, and for those stitch counters, which I'm one of them, that's fine. You don't have to run it, but if it welcomes in a broader community and fits the bill to an acceptable level of accuracy, it can work. And again, if that's going to get someone into the community that will eventually upgrade and eventually perfect everything that they've got, then there's no downside to that. You see, gatekeeping and saying that originals are the only way to go is one of the things that's ruining the community, because without reproductions and without new people coming in and being able to afford all of this, there's not really going to be a community left. So let's say this, you buy a reproduction piece and you want it to look the part, but you don't really know how, because something about it just looks slightly off. Well, there's a lot of opportunity that you have to take a reproduction piece and make it look really good. Like this, honestly, I've never worn it. I bought this, I was going to use it for an impression, and I kind of held on to it and didn't really do much. I mounted some pouches, of course, but if this were to actually get field use, I guarantee it would look much closer to this piece. Although again, there are some differences, which we can get into in another video. Or let's say that you want to do a deployment style kit. Special Forces boys may be running some standard black accessories, but they might paint and customize their pieces, like this LLM-01. This is an airsoft replica, and as you can tell, I put some Schlammkreide on it, and it looks way more realistic than if it were just a plastic hunk of plastic. And I say that derogatorily, these things are not that good. Or even with the helmets, like that ProTech one back there. For the Delta stuff, you're gonna need to paint it or dye it if you can even get that to work. And speaking of dye, everyone hates on Rothko uniforms, and truthfully, I don't think they're the best, but this is a uniform piece that I dyed and then painted and modified to look like the MACV-SOG uniforms. Something that I can use out in the field and for pictures and not feel too bad about. And again, it's not that bright blue Rothko. I took the time to figure out a dye combination to make this work. And this is a way that you can take a reproduction that doesn't look that great and make it look like something that's original. It all takes a little bit of creativity. And that's one of my favorite parts about impressions nowadays. You have to take things that don't look great and make them look fantastic. And there's so much opportunity for self-expression this way as well. Building an impression is an intensely personal experience. You're learning so much. Unless you're doing it like a checklist, there's a whole bunch of steps and processes and things that you're gonna do along the way that make that kit truly yours. It's something to be proud of. And a reproduction shouldn't detract from that. Because in all actuality, if you're looking to honor the people that wore the equipment, build out something that replicates that well, and reenact or show respect or teach others about the history, then it doesn't really matter what's on the inside label of that plate carrier. I know that I'm going to get originals whenever I can, but for you, that's up to you to decide. Weigh the balances, the pros and cons of actually finding the piece or affording the piece. What you want to prioritize in building your impression and what your steps are down the line. We're all in this together, and let me know what you think in the comments below. See you guys.